Medicaid could see its budget slashed by Congress, and that might mean the end for some hospitals in rural Arizona. We'll look at the potential impact. The Department of Justice ends its investigation into the Phoenix Police Department. So what's that going to mean for the people who live here? We'll talk with a civil rights lawyer. And President Trump's big, beautiful bill finally made it through the House. So will its tax breaks and social service cuts survive the Senate? Our panel weighs in now on Politics Unplugged.
Good evening. I'm political editor Dennis Welch, and this is Politics Unplugged. This week, the House passed President Trump's big, beautiful bill that includes extensive cuts to Medicaid. It now moves to the Senate, and there is real concern that if those cuts go into effect, rural hospitals will be forced to close in Arizona and across the country. Here to talk about that is Helena Whitney, the Senior Vice President of Policy and Advocacy for the Arizona Hospital and Healthcare Association. Thank you for being there.
Thank you, Dennis.
Your title is quite the mouthful there.
I was going to say, it's a lot to get through.
So let's start off. You're obviously very concerned right now about the Medicaid cuts.
We are.
We were talking a little bit before the show, and you were saying, look, you're not happy with what's happening now, but you do believe the version of the bill that got out of the House is far less damaging than was originally proposed, correct?
That's absolutely correct, Dennis. We were, I think, terrified is a fair word to use about what would come out of the House. And I feel, Arizona was fortunate to have, Representative Juan Ciscomani, who was willing to listen to us and sit down and really talk through some of those more catastrophic pieces that were being proposed. And thankfully, that's not in the bill, but there's still some pretty bad stuff in there.
So if you start off at terrified, what's the mood now?
Sad and really worried.
Because, the cuts to Medicaid program, we teased at the beginning of the show. I mean, this could come down to potentially forcing closures of rural hospitals. How does that all play out? How would that affect that?
Gosh, so the way that the bill passed out of the House, there are some pretty significant changes to the way people who are currently receiving their health insurance through access, how that happens, and the administrative burden that is now going to be placed on providers. So for example, we're going to have to collect copays if the bill stays the way that it is. And that might sound normal for most people, but if you're making less than $20,000 a year, having to pay copays is hard. But also people are going to have to be eligible every 6 months. And that's, people tend to just not go and get recertified. And that's a problem because...
You're talking about the work requirements that are currently in the piece of legislation. We'll get back to that here in a second. Has your group done any analysis yet? Have you started looking at the financial impact that this bill could have, as it stands right now, on Arizona, or looking at the impact to patient care?
We have. And right now, the way we're looking at it is we are still facing hundreds of millions of dollars in lost revenue from the Medicaid program, which is going to impact every single hospital across Arizona and rurals in particular.
And any dollar amounts you're looking at here? What are we talking about?
It's a little difficult to say exactly how many dollars we're talking about. We really have to look at it in the aggregate. So I think it's just fair to say, as a state, we're still looking at hundreds of millions of dollars in cuts.
And we've seen some estimates, some estimates coming out from the Joint Economic Committee in the House. Estimated about 300,000 people in Arizona could lose coverage on this.
Correct.
What are you guys seeing as far as patient impacts?
We really do work closely with the administration to track those numbers, and I think their estimates are pretty spot on. Okay,
and are there any hospitals in rural Arizona you're looking at that are in particular crisis? I mean, obviously we've seen a number of the stories that have shown that rural hospitals across the country are struggling at this point. Arizona happens to be in better shape than a lot of other states across the country with their rural hospitals, but that doesn't mean they're all doing well.
Yeah, I caution people when I hear in better shape, that just means a 1% or 2% operating margin. And when you're talking about, a place like Yavapai County, for example, where 40% of the people who live there are receiving their health insurance through Medicaid, if half those people lose their coverage, then that hospital now has uncompensated care for double the folks that it's had today. And that means that 1% becomes a negative margin.
Okay, let's get back to the work requirements there. There's going to be stricter work requirements to qualify for Medicaid and whatnot. What are those requirements going to look like, and why would that be a bad thing? Because you hear the Republican side of the argument saying, like, look, what we're trying to do is get that 25-year-old off the couch and get them to stop playing video games, and that's their argument. So let's hear your argument on this.
Work is important. We believe that. In fact, Arizona already has a work requirement on our books. So, we've been working towards what the federal government has been saying they want. However, the problem with what the federal government is asking us to do today is really, really strict and does not take into consideration the difference in places like Arizona. A work requirement in Douglas is not going to be the same as a work requirement in Kingman or in Show Low or here in Phoenix. We need that kind of flexibility, and this bill just doesn't give us that.
Okay, now it's moved over to the Senate. You talked about you'd worked with the congressional delegation from Arizona, including Juan Ciscomani, as it moved through the House. It's over in the Senate now. It's two Democrat senators there. They're in the minority. They're not going to have much say on a lot of this. I mean, what's the strategy now from your group as this makes its way into the upper chamber?
So we do have two Democrats, but I think we have two Democrats that are very good at reaching across the aisle and working with their Republican counterparts. And we've seen as this process has unfolded that there are many Republicans who do not want to see cuts to Medicaid. So I'm hopeful that our delegation can work closely with them to talk about how places like Arizona have done these things already and done them right, and try to get this bill to look more like what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, so I was going to kind of wrap up with that. Let's talk about what you want to see happen in the Senate. Would you just like to see this bill killed and go away in the Senate, or is there ways to work this bill to make it something acceptable from your end?
I mean, I'm a pragmatist, Dennis. The bill's not going to die or go away. I want to see it improved. I want to see flexibility for states so that Arizona can continue to run the great program that we've been running. And I want to see, us acknowledge that people in rural America rely on Medicaid as their fundamental source of health care.
All right, we're going to end it right there. Thank you very much for stopping by.
Thanks for having me.
Still ahead, the Department of Justice has dropped its investigation into practices at the Phoenix Police Department. So what will that mean for the public? We'll talk with a civil rights attorney when Politics Unplugged continues. Welcome back to Politics Unplugged. This week, as expected, the Department of Justice dropped its investigation of the Phoenix Police Department. Last year, the DOJ found the department violated people's rights, discriminated against certain groups, and used excessive force. So what does this mean for the city and its residents? Here to talk about that, civil rights attorney Jesse Schoalter. Thank you so much for being here. And just a little background on yourself. How long have you been practicing civil rights law, and what kind of case have you focused on?
So I've been a plaintiff civil rights lawyer since 2017, so that's 8 years. And my practice focuses on representing Americans, generally Arizonans, who've been injured by government conduct, either police, jail, prison, things of that nature.
Okay. So let's get your reaction to this. I mean, what is this going to do with the relationship between the Phoenix Police Department and the people it is sworn to protect and serve when they start hearing this kind of things?
Well, I think ultimately it's disappointing. I think our community, long before the DOJ came in to investigate, there were a lot of people who were concerned about Phoenix Police, who recognized that there were problems at the Phoenix Police Department, and those aren't things that were written down by a government lawyer somewhere. Those are things that we've watched on television screens. Unfortunately, again and again, incidents where Phoenix police officers are doing things that are obviously unnecessary, obviously unconstitutional to the American citizens, the Arizonans, the residents of Phoenix that they're supposed to be protecting.
I think it's an important point because, you know, I'm not asking you to weigh in on the politics of the whole thing, but politically, you know, this has been looked at through that lens, that it's, you know, the Biden administration, the Trump administration, it's the politics between some of that. But it's important to remember, as you're pointing out, that there were problems that date back quite a few years with Phoenix PD. I mean, what kind of cases have you also seen coming, dealing with Phoenix Police Department, or cases you've heard about?
So, you know, cases I've been involved in, there's the case of Tyrone McAlpin, who was assaulted last summer by Phoenix police officers, who's African American, deaf, suffers from cerebral palsy, and police officers attacked him. There was a press release from, they attacked him and they falsely charged him with crimes that he hadn't committed, including they alleged that he'd stolen his own cell phone. And the city of Phoenix announced earlier this year that it was disciplining 3 officers related to that, but we still haven't seen the report. But everybody who watches that video is outraged, and you know, it looks like there's some discipline that was a slap on the wrist, but we still have to see what the details of it are. Yeah, and I was say, prior to that, there are just countless shootings of people that the city of Phoenix is responsible for, and then there are, you know, half a dozen restraint deaths in custody that were preventable and predictable and clear violations of constitutional rights.
Yeah, and you know the arguments to that, though a lot of people in the public will say, well, yeah, but Phoenix police, they deal with a lot of deadly situations or forceful situations. Sometimes they get shot at. So sometimes they have to pull their guns or use lethal force.
Yeah, and legal and constitutional guidelines allow police officers to do that. There's nobody who's suing police officers for using justified force. Everybody recognizes that there are good police officers, that there are good and justified uses of force. What all of this is really about is that they're, you know, looking at the data at City of Phoenix, there's really a problem here. And now that the Department of Justice's report is gone, the facts on the ground remain the same, that there are all these incidents and acknowledgments from Phoenix PD, from City Hall itself, that, hey, you know, something needs to be done. And now if the Department of Justice isn't going to do anything, which, you know,
I was going to say that, you know, the mayor, the city leaders, they say, well, we're going to continue to reform the department. You're bringing up a case from just a year ago. Are you concerned, or do you think Phoenix PD can reform itself?
It's not something that we've seen. We've not seen police departments fix themselves. It's a large bureaucracy. It has its own culture that's well ingrained, and what we see in all of these cases, again and again, is that an incident happens and they do not police themselves. That something outrageous happens, a clear constitutional violation, and the supervisors on scene do nothing about it, don't discipline anyone, and it's only when there is something in the media or something in the courts that they even pay attention at all, and even conduct an administrative investigation, which I think everybody thinks should be, you know, just the first thing that a police department does.
Yeah, and that's interesting. Talk to me a little bit about the culture, and do you think, you know, it needed some sort of federal oversight or some sort of outside agency looking over that to change that culture? Because it can be, from what I've heard, very difficult to change a culture in, you know, in an institution that has been around for as long as the police department.
That's what I think. I think that the problem is in the training division. It's at the supervisory level, and it's recognizing that on a daily basis, officers are doing things the wrong way and not correcting that, not retraining them, not stepping in, and not fixing the problem. And that's the issue, and the problem with the idea that they would fix themselves is we are here today where we are because of them. Their culture has led to this. It's developed over years, over decades, and the idea that they're going to to fix it is ridiculous because they don't even recognize the problem.
Is there anything that you see that the city council can do moving forward? Since there's not going to be any federal oversight and this investigation has now been dropped, what would you like to see the city do?
You know, what I would like to see is that the city and the chief of police, when we have one, that they make a serious point about investigating uses of force, investigating citizen complaints, and implementing real discipline of officers who violate City of Phoenix policies. Because what we've seen again and again in cases that I've litigated is somebody dies, we do civil litigation, civil discovery, and police officers admit under oath that they violated City of Phoenix policies, which should result in discipline, but there is no discipline. And, you know, that may be, there may be a number of reasons for that, but that is something that they have the power to change, and they should change.
All right, thank you very much, Jesse Schoalter, for stopping by here. And up next, I'm bringing in our panel to talk about all of this week's major headlines, including President Trump's big, beautiful bill that now moves on to the Senate. That's next here on Politics Unplugged. To get more in depth on the issues, check out the Politics Unplugged podcast. This week, we talked with Phoenix Councilwoman Ana Hernandez about the Department of Justice dropping its investigation into the Phoenix Police Department. The Politics Unplugged podcast drops every Sunday wherever you get your podcasts. And welcome back to Politics Unplugged. President Trump's big, beautiful bill extending tax cuts and slashing funding for Medicaid and food stamps narrowly passed the House and it now moves to the Senate, where its fate is not clear. And here to talk about that and the rest of this week's headlines, Republican consultant Marcus Dellartino and Democratic consultant Don Penage. Thank you both for being here. Let's start up with that big, beautiful bill there, Marcus. What's the fate look like right now as it heads over to the Senate, where it's going to face some resistance?
Yeah, I think early indications are that some Republican senators are squawking a little bit about the entirety of the fiscal impact. You know, there's an argument to be made it runs a deficit. I know the White House says it doesn't. However, I think in totality, when you look at some of these, look, we're taking out tips or taxes on tips. That's a huge hole in the deficit right there. And then you look at these Medicaid cuts and some of the other things. I think you're looking at a negotiation actually truly happening in the Senate, where you will see this divide in the Republican Party. And by the way, the Democratic Party has a divide too. But what I call the Reagan Republicans versus now the Trump Republicans.
Right, they're still Reagan Republicans?
The Senate's 172 years old. I mean, those guys are all old enough to be Reagan Republicans.
All right. I asked about this a little bit earlier. What's the role for Arizona's two Democratic senators? Obviously, they've raised alarm bells about this. They've held town halls about this. They're not happy with cuts to Medicaid. What's their role? What can they do at being in the minority?
Well, not a lot. You know, in the Senate, they only need 50 Republican votes. Now, as Marcus was saying, several Republican senators have already been very vocal that they are not moving forward with the bill that the House is delivering to them. And so, you know, I think a lot of negotiations will happen, but at the end of the day, almost certainly a bill will go back to the House that will create more dysfunction and more disagreement. And we might see a replay of, you know, a couple decades ago almost, where, you know, this bill just, people take dangerous political votes in the House, where I'm looking at Siscomani, who's going to have a challenge next year, Schweikart, who is always having a challenge and somehow surviving them. But, you know, at the end of the day, the Arizona senators are opposed to this. If people want to continue to be heard and be engaged on some of these horrific cuts to middle and working class families and clean and our economy in general, the number of jobs that will be lost if this House bill progresses, then they should continue reaching out to their Republican congressmen, because they are going to see this bill again.
Yeah, and it does have a lot of political ramifications. I mean, you've got a current Congress member now, Andy Biggs, looking to run for governor. I mean, is that something that can play in that race?
Well, certainly it's going to play in that race, but Andy's been in politics for, what, 20 years now plus, and so there's a lot of things that are going to play into that race. I'm thinking more in the context of Schweikart, who missed the vote but did tell a reporter he would support this, which I thought was, you know, it sort of defeats the purpose of missing the
vote.
missing the vote. And then, of course, Juan Ciscomani, which I think it's going to play a huge part in his race. So, yeah, there's a whole lot of implications. And when you look at the impact on these rural hospitals, and frankly, the one that nobody's really talking about, Phoenix Children's Hospital, will have a massive impact to that hospital system.
Real quick, and stick with you one more for a little bit longer. We talked about Reagan Republicans just a minute ago. What happened to the Fiscal Hawks? The Republican Party? This adds a lot to the deficit, and Republicans have always been out there screaming about the deficit. We need to do something about the deficit, yet they're moving this bill through.
Well, and that's the argument that you're hearing out of the Senate that Donna and I are talking about. Those holdouts in the Senate that are saying we need some changes, those are the fiscal hawks that are taking a look at it. When you look at the deficit and the debt, you know, there's only, all the stuff that we've been doing up to date is pennies on the dollar. It's nothing. The only places that you can cut are defense spending, entitlement spending, which Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security, and then payments on the debt, on the national debt. Those are the only places to cut. And so that's why you're looking at right now that they're focusing on Medicaid to try and make up some of that. That's real revenue to the state. Now, to the country. But what we've also done is added a bunch of tax cuts, like no taxing on tips and income tax, bringing down the income tax, other things.
Well, most of the tax cuts are for the ultra wealthy. I mean, and that's the nefarious part of the talking point about cutting taxes on tips. That is so temporary. That is only a policy for 3 years. So those working class Americans, Arizonans who are thinking like, oh, well, you know, there's something in that bill for me. Not for long. This is not going to take long to come back and bite millions of Americans. And
let's bring it back to Arizona, because we're in the middle of supposedly a budget negotiation at the legislature, even though they keep taking vacation. That's another story. But let's bring it back to Arizona. What would Medicaid cuts do for Arizona and its budget?
Well, I mean, we have 2 million Arizonans on Medicaid. Approximately 300,000 of them could lose health care coverage altogether. The others who stay on Medicaid would see cuts to their coverage. And remember, we're talking about kids, we're talking about the elderly, we're talking about folks who live in rural communities. So we will feel that. Now, nobody lives in a silo, right? So not only are Arizonans going to see cuts to these basic benefits and programs, but we're also paying more due to Republican tariffs for everyday goods. And the state, our state budget cannot cover this moving forward. So we're also going to feel the effects of state programs that we rely on simply not being able to exist much longer. Also thanks to Republican tax cuts from the previous administration and our out-of-control private school voucher program. So one thing I'll say is if you're in Arizona, and this is Republican, Democrat alike, and calling an alarm, pointing out the problems of what just happened in Washington and the policies coming out of there, but you're thinking about giving one of Arizona billionaires a big handout, having taxpayers pay for baseball stadium upgrades, for instance, folks need to look in the mirror, and Democrats, we need to be connecting the dots on who is voting for these policies and what we want to do next year when they're on our ballot again.
And let's stick with this same topic. I mean, you know, Marks, how do you think this is all going to affect, you know, budget negotiations moving forward? Because there is a big chunk of money that could be cut coming into Arizona. We got about 10 seconds.
Yeah, thanks a bunch. It adds a whole bunch more uncertainty. So what you want to do right now is be as fiscally conservative as humanly possible, not knowing the outcome going into the next budget, which could be massively significant. And I will add that because of the voter constraints that we put on a number of these programs, the state of Arizona has to pick up the tab, and we have difficulty in raising revenue.
All right, good job there, speeding that up there, cramming that all in. But that is all the time we have this week. Be sure to join us next week for more Politics Unplugged. Good night.